Thank you for joining me. My name is Ian Katz, and you are listening to my Auto-ethnography on the Jewish American experience. So we're going to move pretty quick here, so I hope you can keep up. My introduction here, around 6.7 million Jews in America. So that's 2% of the American population that's Jewish. Really quickly, I just want to define what I mean by Jewish. That means not only those who believe in the religious teachings of Jews, but also the cultural teachings of Jews. And you know what that would mean is they grew up in a household that had one or two parents that were Jewish and that raised them, using the Jewish teachings, and maybe they celebrated Jewish holidays, but they are culturally Jewish as well. So going forward, in this project I will refer to non-Jewish spaces. So I think it's important to define this as well, and that is a space or community where the majority of individuals are not Jewish. And remember the definition for what makes a member Jewish. And then getting into my driving questions for this project, they are: what is the emotional experience for an American Jew in typically non-Jewish spaces? And then my second one is: how does an American Jew support the Black Lives Matter movement while also supporting the existence of Israel? Really quickly, which is I just wanted to touch on my bias, which is that I am a Jewish American, and I went to a non-Jewish high school and non-Jewish college, and I received a lot of anti-Semitism and always felt a little bit out of place. So that is my bias. That is kind of the narrative that kind of guided me through this. And then as far as the second question with the Black Lives Matter issue, my experience and my bias is that the Black Lives Matter issue is more important than the disconnect between the Israeli stance and the actual the main cause, which is the unjust treatment of black and brown people in America. And so just the narrative that I have that has guided me through this project is that Black Lives Matter is important to the Jewish American community and is an important part of the Jewish American experience. So for methodology, I did primary research, which I will get into in a little bit, with some interviews with my little brother Zach and my mom Marsa, and I'll touch on those. I'll give you a little bit of introduction, and we'll listen to some snippets from that. And then as far as secondary research, which I'll get into right now, I did some research on statistics about the Jewish population as a whole, as well as some articles and readings about both the Black Lives Matter connection to Israel, and to the Jewish community as a whole, and also just the Jewish American experience altogether. So one thing I looked at in terms of my secondary research is a survey done by the American Jewish Committee of Jewish Americans. A little bit redundant there with the name, but the survey showed the following. When asked, is anti-Semitism a problem in America today, 88% of respondents said yes. And when asked, has anti-Semitism in America increased in the last 5 years, 82% said yes. Looking at a specific example of anti-Semitism in our country, the Tree of Life shooting in 2018 really comes to mind, with 11 Jews being shot and killed at the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh. What's important to note here is that the shooter had been posting anti-Semitic tropes and conspiracy theories on social media, communicating with others. There's a strong community of anti-Semitism in the ether sphere, online and whatnot. And it came to a head in 2018, but it continues to, in more ways than just shootings, it continues to show up in our society. So now comes the question of fighting for Black lives as an American Jew. There's been a long history of Jewish American involvement in the fight for equality dating back to the 19th century. I highly suggest that you check out some of the sources that will be listed in the description for this podcast. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to go into that today, but highly suggest looking into it. But there's been a long involvement and long connection between Jewish Americans and Black Americans, and now getting into this kind of disconnect is in 2016 the Movement for Black Lives platform came together and described Israel as an apartheid state that is committing genocide against the Palestinian people. And while I'm not going to come out and make a stand or state my position on that. It did rub a lot of Jewish Americans the wrong way, as there is a feeling of anti-Zionism and anti-Zionism, many argue, is inherently anti-Semitic. And as my brother will put that, as you'll hear in his interview later. And so, but at the same time, can the Israeli or can the Jewish American be critical of Israel and also, be a Zionist? And where does that start and where does that end? And then the other disconnect that I thought was important to note is this individual, Louis Farrakhan. He is the leader of the Nation of Islam, and while they do a lot of good things in terms of empowering black individuals, black and brown individuals all over the world, he's also made a lot of anti-Semitic remarks, anti-trans remarks. And he has a long history of this. And then a lot of the media-facing members of the Black Lives Matter movement have been big supporters of him and have echoed his beliefs on social media, posting anti-Semitic tropes, saying it in interviews, that Jews control the media, that Jews are these Hollywood elites. Something that Louis Farrakhan said, which I thought was really important just to point out. And in 2018, he said, the Jews were responsible for all the filth and degenerate behavior that Hollywood is putting out, turning men into women and women into men. So this statement is not only anti-Semitic, but also anti-trans and just very, very hateful. So now I wanted to get into my interviews. So a little bit about my brother Zach before we touch on his interview, and hear a little bit of his thoughts. Zach is a college student at the University of Syracuse. He is in a non-Jewish fraternity, and he went to a Jewish high school. So I thought it would be really interesting to talk to him kind of about his different experiences, right? So he experienced the Jewish space for much of his life, for 4 years, from freshman year of high school to senior year of high school, and then immediately went off to a college and joined a non-Jewish frat. So this is, right now, you're going to hear a little bit of his response to the question of the difference between his experiences in high school and in college. Here you go.
I mean, when I was in high school, like, going to a Shabbat dinner on Friday night was like a normal thing. Mm-hmm. Like having that Jewish experience with your friends was like a very normal thing. And like that's just like, it's not even like a part of it at school, obviously, because most of my friends aren't Jewish. But like some of my friends at school are Jewish, and like having that Jewish experience with them, like going to temple for the holidays or fasting with them, it's like a nice experience to be able to. It's kind of like a taste of high school almost with my friends at school when I am able to experience like the Jewish part of a friendship again. Mm-hmm. It's nice, but I'd say it's very different in the sense that like it was normal to talk about Jewish stuff, and at school it's not like it's like exclusive to me, Mm-hmm. It's usually.
So as you can see there, Zach, has had very different experiences between high school and college. To paraphrase, basically, he felt a lot more comfortable expressing his Judaism when, around other Jews and in a more Jewish space, traditionally. While obviously, I know my brother, he's thriving in college. He's loving life. He's making great friendships and great relationships. But that piece is potentially missing. And I think it's important to note that is, a big part of the Jewish experience of assimilating into non-Jewish spaces is having a little bit of that trade-off. So I also asked my brother about the Black Lives Matter movement, and my brother is a firm supporter of Black Lives Matter, and I asked him about kind of the connection between his Judaism and his support, and he made a very interesting point. So I'm gonna let him explain that in his words. Give it a listen.
There's kind of this like belief that oppressed groups of people, like if you consider yourself part of a group that was at one point oppressed, supposed to, at least like the Jewish way of looking at it is like you're supposed to help others that are experiencing the same sort of oppression that you face.
So his perspective there is really, I think, important, that it's a responsibility in the Jewish tradition, right, to stand up for inequality wherever it may show itself, and in our country right now and historically that has been the case. So he feels it is his responsibility as a Jew to be involved in this fight for equal rights. Naturally, our conversation then turned to a little bit of the disconnect between Zionists and the Black Lives Matter movement. I will let him discuss the difference between being critical of Israel and being anti-Zionist.
The idea of being anti-Zionist is anti-Semitic. Anti-Zionist, if you are anti-Zionist, you are anti-Semitic. So, because being a Zionist means you believe in the existence of Israel. You believe that there should be a Jewish state. So if you don't believe that, there is a deep sense of anti-Semitism in that.
Really interesting perspective from my brother Zach, and was grateful to have Zach on. And yeah, now looking at my next interview, it was with my mom, Marsa. So Marsa has the perspective of somebody who grew up very religious, and also has historically been very connected to the temple, to our congregation. She served as in all types of roles in the temple, from community service head to being in charge of the kitchen on Shabbats, and even being involved in the Hebrew school to an extent, and community outreach. She's worn all types of hats. But she also has the perspective of a person who is very involved in non-Jewish spaces. She's a very skilled yoga instructor, has served as a nurse, has been a dietitian, a nutritionist, but right now it's her yoga community which she is involved in the most. I asked her about the experience she has in the Jewish community and in Jewish spaces that makes it so special to her, and why she seeks it out. And I'll let her answer speak for itself.
It's the only place that I really go that I know that it's all Jewish people.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there's something that's unspoken that we have in common.
Mm-hmm.
We share a certain belief system, a certain history, a certain ancestry that binds us together. It doesn't mean that I only want to exclusively be with people that I share that with, but when I'm in my synagogue, I know that that's there.
Yeah. So excuse the music in the background. Only fitting when talking to my yoga instructor mother that there should be some serene music playing. But next, I actually asked her about her experience in the non-Jewish space and how her Judaism impacts her there, and if she ever feels any sort of disconnect with that community as a result of her Judaism. Her answer actually kind of shocked me a little bit, and I was careful not to ask about any sort of anti-Semitism that she may have received, because I didn't want to push my bias onto her too much and kind of let her lead with her experience. But give her answer a listen here. Very, very surprising to me.
I have not even thought about it. It doesn't come up. Now that it's coming into the holidays, like this 300-hour training that I'm co-facilitating, as we head into the holidays and people, start to bring in their holiday traditions and their food and their need to have coverage for classes or whatnot, that will become more evident, and I will probably think more about my holiday traditions around that time. But the holidays in December in Judaism don't have the same significance, meaning, or depth as the holidays around in December for Christians. But for me, my holidays are in the fall. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, those are my big holidays.
So what stood out to me about her response there was that she hadn't even really thought about how her Judaism separated her or impacted her in her non-Jewish spaces. So that was really interesting to me, especially for me, who has received, a lot of anti-Semitism and, had pennies thrown at me and dollars waved at me in high school and comments about my nose and that I didn't look Jewish and all sorts of anti-Semitic, I hesitate to even call them microaggressions because a lot of them were, in fact, aggressive and malicious. So to hear her perspective was very interesting. I then asked her about the Black Lives Matter movement, my second driving question. And like my brother, she is 100% behind the Black Lives Matter movement. She hasn't even considered the disconnect. And I'll let her answer that in her own words here.
I believe in Black Lives Matter in the regard of, the racial disparities in our country and all over the world, but especially in our country, and what we've seen a rise of bubble up out of the, above the surface over the last 4 years. And I firmly am anti-racist in that regard. I have not really examined my feelings around the anti-Semitism and the Black Lives Matter, but the stuff that's happened over the recent past, I am just I'm horrified by.
So if you're wondering what that snorting was, that was our dog Cooper. He is a French bulldog, and he wanted to get involved in the interview. But kind of getting back to the content of the interview, she, like my brother, has just been horrified by what we've seen in the media, and just trying to learn as much as we can about the inequality in the Black community, and that to my mom, that's been more important, and that has been more pressing than any sort of anti-Semitism that might be tied to it. She hasn't even considered it, because it is just so important to her as a person to support the fight for equal justice. And this is coming from somebody who I know for a fact it has been very, very pro-Israel her whole life, is a Zionist, and struggles with, obviously the politics of Israel, as many American Jews do. But the issue of Black Lives Matter was unquestioned by her, and she doesn't even consider any sort of anti-Zionism that might be a part of it, because the fight for equal justice and equal rights in our country is so much more pressing at this point in time, and is so, she said it is just horrifying to her, so I know that she spends a lot of time trying to learn more about the experience of Black Americans, and this is become an experience for the American Jew at this point in time, is trying to understand the point of view of the Black American, and learn from that, and learn how to be allies there. So I will conclude it there. A couple big takeaways here is that the American Jew, while anti-Semitism does exist, and that we saw in the survey, and in some other readings, while it does exist, the feeling of connection to the fellow Jewish American does exist. There is also an ability, which we saw with my brother and my mom, to be strong members of the non-Jewish spaces, and to fit in those non-Jewish spaces. However, a feeling of comfort does come from the Jewish spaces. And as far as Black Lives Matter and the Black Lives Matter movement goes, and any sort of disconnect between that and the Zionist cause, the fight for Black lives much outweighs any sort of disconnect that might be there. And we saw that in the interviews, and we see that in a lot of we see that throughout history. And again, I urge you to go back and read some of those sources. That's all I've got from my auto-ethnography on the Jewish American experience. I'm Ian Katz. Thank you for listening.
We are all just people seeing charts and numbers. We are all the people behind the numbers, when numbers represent sickness.